Hello! Welcome to Filmmakers Focus. I'm Doc Kennedy. This week's special guest is Tommy G. Kendrick. Tommy is a character actor. You'll know him from films such as The Alamo, Bernie, Friday Night Lights, the show and the movie. Among the many topics Tommy and I will be talking about, we're going to talk about SAG-AFTRA. And Tommy shares how small indie films or student films can actually get big-name actors into their films at low cost. This is a workaround I didn't know about, and it is exciting. So before we dive into our chat with Tommy, I'll give you a quick update on myself. Still working the evening job, doing that 5 nights a week. Been working freelance as well, and doing a number of projects in that arena. And I started working on a screenplay that I am pretty excited about. And it's been really cool just to see the dots be connected. I want to thank Jody Mayberry for leaving an iTunes review. He says, Doc brings filmmaking into focus. Doc brings his own experience into the show and combines it with the knowledge and experience of his guests to bring valuable content for all aspiring filmmakers. Thank you, Jody. You know, every iTunes review probably doesn't mean much to the average listener, but it means a lot to the podcaster because that helps generate more visibility for the show in the iTunes search engine. So if you're willing to take the time and leave an iTunes review for Filmmakers Focus, it's much appreciated. Thank you for the social media shares as well. That does not go unnoticed, and hopefully I've given you the recognition you deserve on that. If I haven't, let me know, and I'll make sure it happens. So with that said, let's get to our chat with Tommy G. Kendrick.
And now our feature presentation.
Tommy Kendrick, welcome to the Filmmakers Focus.
Well, Doc Kennedy, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it very, very much.
You know, one of the thrills of podcasting for me has been having the opportunity to meet people like yourself. I just love what you're doing with Actors Talk. I have gotten so much out of that. You have about, 60 episodes now?
65 just went live on Thursday. Yeah.
And I've listened to probably 60 of those. I know there's a few in there somewhere I haven't heard yet, but I'm getting to them.
You're a glutton for punishment, I can tell.
I tell you what, though, if it's not good material, you know, I don't listen. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thanks, man. That means the world to me. It really does. I mean, the reason I do the podcast is, well, for a couple of reasons. One, it's a creative outlet for myself. Actors are, spend a lot of time between acting gigs, no matter where you are in the business, and you need something to keep yourself going and creative, and that's one of the things that I do that serves that purpose. But the bigger purpose is to try and give back some of all this stuff that's stored up in my head and my heart that I've experienced over the years and be able to maybe help someone else who's coming along behind that doesn't know anyone in the business, as I did not, that doesn't have a mentor in the business, as I did not, and maybe it could just make it a little easier for somebody. And it's so much fun, as you said, to get to meet people that you never even might have considered that you get to meet before. So it's just been terrific. Thank you for the compliments on the show. It really means a lot.
Oh, yeah, you betcha. And I highly recommend everyone go check out Actors Talk. Whether you're a director, producer, actor, check it out. There's something in there for everyone. But Tommy, let's take things back a little ways. So you're a young buck. What made you decide that acting was going to be the career for you?
You're asking me to go way back because I am not a young buck at this point. But I get your point. Well, without getting too deep into the rabbit hole here, once I had sort of overcome the initial fear of becoming a performer of any kind, which happened in high school, was something I had wanted to do for a long time, but was just terribly too shy to do it, but managed to overcome that shyness and that fear and get involved in drama in high school. And from there was just no question that I would major in theater or in my university, my local university where I went, it was speech and drama. There was no real separate theater department. But then when I was involved in that, I did not have any notion that I would make acting a lifelong profession. I just assumed, well, maybe I'll be an acting or a drama teacher, and do something for some other kid the way my high school drama teacher had done for me. And it took about 2 days of my student teaching to realize that is not what I wanted to do. I just couldn't even imagine, what teachers have to go through. And that was, 40 years ago. So imagine what it is today. But so I was struggling with, well, what was I going to do? And I was heavily involved at that time. There used to be, and I don't know if they're still around or not, but that there used to be a group on campuses called Baptist Student Union, BSU. And I was heavily involved in BSU, and we would go on these retreats several times a year. And I think my senior year in college, we went on a retreat, and the guest there was talking to mostly senior students about, well, what are you going to do with your life? And of course, it's a thing that all of us ponder, whether we're actors or carpenters or airline pilots or whatever it is. At some point, all of us have these discussions with ourselves and think, why am I here? What was I put on this earth to do? Who am I? What do I want to do? And this guy, I don't even remember his name, but he boiled it down to a few sort of simple things that he thought we should consider that made great sense to me. And it was like, what are you passionate about? What do you spend most of your time thinking about during a day? What are you working towards? What gets you excited to get up in the morning? If you could do anything you wanted to do for the rest of your life, what would it be? And to look at those things and think, well, you know what? Maybe that's the seed that God has planted in your heart, that's what you're supposed to do. Now, you have to have talent if you're going to be an actor to go along with that. But I did believe I had talent. I just had not considered that's the journey I would take. But at that point, I realized, that is the journey that I want to be on. And that's how it all got kicked off.
So you get this epiphany of this is what you're going to do. What was your next step?
Well, I was still living in Beaumont, Texas. I was not married. I was engaged to my wife, Jane, at the time, and she was a year behind me. So we were waiting for her to graduate to take the next step. In the meantime, I was looking at graduate schools to go get some further acting training, MFA programs, places. Let's see, where had I applied? All over the place. Florida State, Temple University. I can't remember all the places I had gone. I had even taken a few trips to do some in-person auditions, and that's a whole other story. And nothing was going on. Nothing had worked out. I was working in the student bookstore this summer, and a buddy of mine who had already graduated came back for the summer and looked me up. He was a fellow theater student, and he had gone to Dallas, to the Dallas Theater Center. And he came back raving about the Dallas Theater Center. And it turns out our professor, the late S. Walker James at Lamar University, had a connection with Paul Baker, also the late Paul Baker, who was the managing director, founding director of the Dallas Theater Center. My professor had been his student at Baylor University, and so there was a connection there. So I went to Dr. James and said, is there any way you can help me get into this Dallas Theater Center? And he did, and I went there as an apprentice. Dallas Theater Center at the time had an apprentice program with Trinity University in San Antonio. So you would do all of your work as an acting apprentice. This was sort of an old style theater setup where the newbies would come in as apprentices and work for several years and hopefully become members of the company if they stayed around and worked their way into that. In the meantime, we took classes and, of course, all sorts of classes in voice and movement and speech and different forms of acting and different periods of acting. And if you did all that, you could come out of that apprentice program with a Master of Fine Arts in whatever your discipline was. Mine happened to be acting, and I was able to do that. So it was... And I turned out to, I arrived at the Dallas Theater Center at an absolutely stupendous time because they were doing a tremendous number of new plays and just great works that gained some notoriety, and I was able to work in a lot of those. So it was off to a great start. Those years I remember with great fondness.
Oh, that's great. So what do you recommend to somebody who's in that position where they're just getting started? They've had that epiphany that you've had. Do you recommend the same start, that you seek out a local theater club? What are your recommendations to people these days? Because things are different.
Yeah, things are very, very different now than they were then. But you make a good point. And the thing I would tell people is start where you are. don't think I've got to get to Los Angeles, or if you want to be in theater primarily, I've got to get to New York right away. Trust me, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of hopefuls and wannabes in both places that don't have a clue, and it's very difficult. For one thing, New York or Los Angeles are very expensive places to live. You have to support yourself. You have to have a roof over your head. So unless you have a lot of money or parents that are willing to lay out a lot of money for your basic needs, then that would just be, a terrible mistake to just head off with no plan. So start where you are. Gather some experience. Decide if you want to do primarily theater or if you want to do film, television, if you want to do it all. That may inform where you eventually want to move. If you want to do theater after you start where you are and get some experience, or maybe you want to start auditioning for some regional theaters and get involved in the regional theaters across the country. And there are many fine ones, and a lot of actors make a whole career in regional theater. So those are some things you also need to sort of pinpoint, if you can, and maybe that will change, what will be the focus of your career? What are your goals? If your goals are to act in primarily stage plays, maybe a career in regional theater is going to be the epitome for you, and that is incredible. Maybe you want to try and work in film and television, and so that might lead you another direction. Although in film and television now, the business has changed so much, you don't need to go to Los Angeles. There's a major hub growing in Atlanta, Georgia right now, for instance. There's a lot of work even in Austin or in Texas, in New Mexico, in Louisiana. So there are a lot of regional areas where you can begin your work, and where it's oftentimes easier to get into the performers unions than it would be in Los Angeles and New York. So I definitely would recommend start where you are. Don't decide you're going to pick up and leave before you're prepared.
You talked very openly about being a SAG-AFTRA actor. Do you recommend somebody that's a newbie coming in to try to get that SAG card right away, or should they try to hold off, maybe hone their skills before they make that jump?
Yeah, absolutely. They should hold off. And I absolutely am a big supporter of SAG-AFTRA. SAG-AFTRA has been great for me over the years. SAG-AFTRA has gone to bat for me and collected literally thousands of dollars in monies that I've been owed that I would ordinarily or otherwise not have been able to collect on my own. So, and they provide safety on the set and wages and working conditions and residuals and all sorts of things that are beneficial. And one of the reasons I had joined SAG in the first place, and that's now SAG-AFTRA, is that all of my heroes who were actors, all the people I looked up to, when I went to investigate their biographies and things, they were all SAG-AFTRA members. So that meant something to me to be a part of that group, and it did. So, but it's not something you want to get into too soon. You want to have enough experience that, you can get the next job, because you have to realize that if you do honor the Rule 1 of SAG-AFTRA is that you will not work for a non-signatory producer. So once you join the union, you really are not supposed to work for non-union projects. And I honor that very strictly. That's a very strong ethical consideration on my part. And that's an individual decision, obviously, but it is something that one agrees to when you join the union. So you definitely should wait. Now there comes a point, if depending on the market you're working in, and if you're in a right to work state or not a right to work state, there are a lot of issues there. But if you've done a SAG-AFTRA job, and let's say you're in Los Angeles, what they call Taft-Hartley, the next time you do a SAG-AFTRA job, you then become what's called a must join. So there's things that are a little bit of nuances depending on the market you're in. But basically, yeah, wait until you're experienced and you can compete with the other professional actors before you jump in.
So, Tommy, you've been working on short films lately. You've been doing more of those. How does the budget for that work with being a SAG actor?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because even on short films or even student films, as a SAG-AFTRA actor, that I need that production to be what's called a signatory production. The good news is that's a very, very easy process, especially for student films or short films. It's a very simple contract. The SAG-AFTRA short film agreement in particular allows for the mixture of both what they would term professional and not professional actors. They would term the professional actors being the SAG-AFTRA member. Okay, so sorry if that offends anyone, but you can mix and match union and non-union actors. Only the union actors under the SAG-AFTRA short film agreement are covered by the agreement. The non-union actors are not. And then the rate, the day rate on a SAG-AFTRA short film is the enormous sum of $100 a day. And that sum can be completely deferred if the producer and the actor agree to do that. It does not have to be paid up front, and actually never has to be paid unless the project gets some sort of distribution beyond film festivals.
Okay. So that makes it very doable for people that are in the indie film industry, or like you said, even students, to be able to have actors like yourself that have a real foothold in the acting community, you know, as people that we're going to recognize on screen and be able to take that film to the next level. So that's really encouraging.
It can be very helpful. I mean, one thing that, you know, low budget independent filmmakers need, or student filmmakers even, is it really helps. Now, I don't fall into this category. I am not a name actor that's going to help somebody get distribution. But what using a SAG-AFTRA contract does, it opens up that door to using any actor who is a SAG-AFTRA member who would be willing to do that project. And people would be amazed look around at some of the big name actors who have done and are doing short films. If you present an actor, even a name actor that you ordinarily might think, oh, they won't work on this kind of a project, actors want to work on good projects. Actors want to act in good roles. And if you present an actor with a good role in what looks like a good project, if it's a short film and they have time to do it and they can, you'd be surprised who would do a project like that. But they can't do it legally, quote unquote legally, if it's not a SAG-AFTRA project. So, you know, doing it under that agreement makes it possible and can really benefit the production.
You know, one of the things I love about your story, Tommy, is you've been acting since you were a kid, really. And you still have that same passion that you had then. You know, what keeps that going for you?
Well, I'm still trying to make it. No, you know what, Doc? It hasn't been without its ups and downs. I mean, there have been times when I thought, oh, this is it. I'm quitting. It's not working, you know. But the thing is, if it is a calling, if what you're doing is that passion in your soul, if whatever it is, in my case, it's acting, if that is still within you, and if you believe that that's what God put you on this earth to do, then how do you quit? How do you quit? Now, some people probably listen to this and say, well, you're fooling yourself. You know, you've never starred in a film. You've never starred in a series. You've worked on a lot of things, but, you know, you're not a success from what some people would say. But, you know, success is defined in various ways. My wife keeps telling me I'm much more of a success than even I think I am sometimes. But how do you quit? How do you quit if it's your calling? You don't. And I've had this conversation with God on a few occasions, you know, and sometimes it's been a heated conversation, at least on my end, saying, you know, if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, why isn't this working out in this particular circumstance better? But you know what? Every time, I can't remember a time when this hasn't happened. Every time when I've come to a crisis of faith, so to speak, or confidence or whatever, something has happened to just draw me back and say, okay, I see. I was being defeatist. Let me get back on track here. So, and there have been a couple of times where that's happened. Sometimes it's been a job. One time recently, just a few years ago, I got a call from an old friend from my Dallas Theater Center days, actually, that I hadn't heard from in a long time. And I was just sitting around not doing anything necessarily, and the phone rang, and it was this friend, and she said, "Oh, Tommy, I just wanted to tell you, I was watching something and I saw Bernie, this movie Bernie that I'm in. I saw Bernie. I had no idea you were in that. I was so excited. You were so this and that." And we talked for a while, and she said, I just wanted to call you and tell you how proud I am of you, that of all of us who started out together, you're the one that's still going. And, I went, wow, thank you, and I was at a pretty low point emotionally thinking, well, I don't know, maybe I'm at the end of the road. Actors tend to think sometimes that the job we just had is going to be the last job we'll ever have. Sometimes it seems that way. But that call was just another example of, I would say just someone reaching out and touching me, even though they didn't know that I needed to be touched at the moment, but I did.
Tommy, you talk about mentorship quite a bit with Actors Talk, and you had a pretty special mentor in your life, Gregory Wolcott. Can you share with us a little bit about Greg, and then what the value of that mentorship has meant to you in your career?
Well, Greg Wolcott was a tremendous person. He passed away last year in March, and what a great guy. He was one of the first people that Jane and I met in Los Angeles after we moved to Los Angeles. And it was a very odd occurrence, actually. Greg was a very successful actor. If you look at his IMDb page, he's got, 100 and scores and scores and scores of credits. He was for years a very valued guest star on television and worked in a number of Clint Eastwood movies. In fact, Clint Eastwood sponsored him into the Academy, the folks that put on the Academy Awards. And that's not a position that comes easily to be a member of the Academy. We met Greg because he was serving as a pastor in a little Baptist church in Burbank, California. And Greg had been a pastor or speaker at events and things most of his career. And we became friends. In fact, he came to visit after we had been to his church, and I didn't really recognize him at the time. But Jane, my wife, is a huge Western fan, and Greg was in every Western ever made on television. It was a big favorite guest star on shows like Bonanza and that. So she recognized him. But seeing, this actor as a preacher, she didn't put it together, And he came to visit a few days later, and he asked me, what I was doing. I told him, well, I'm an actor. And in his deep North Carolina voice that I can't really replicate, said, well, I am too. That's great, And we became friends, and we, started going to that church. He was my pastor for a number of years, but became a dear, dear friend. Greg did things for me that no actor could be expected to do as a friend and a mentor. I mean, there were times when he would take me along with him on his auditions because he knew all the casting people so well. Now, most of his career, especially through the meaty part of his career, he often did not audition. People would just call him to book the role because he was that well known. But later on, when I knew him, he was back to auditioning. And he would call the casting director and say, is it okay if I bring someone to read with me so the casting director wouldn't have to? And they'd say, sure. So he would take me or my friend Joe Graves also along from time to time into the casting office so that we would get in front of that casting director. Now that's insane. That's insane to do that because you don't know, but he was not thinking of himself. He was thinking of me or of Joe at the time. But beyond that, it was just his friendship and his stories of how to act on set and stories of, things that would happen on location and working with this director or that director. You just absorb all of that information. And he became not only a great friend, but a wonderful mentor. And, if I could do anything for every actor that I ever meet, it would be to introduce them to Gregory Wolcott. Sadly, they won't be able to meet him in person now, but he was just an incredible, incredible man.
Well, they can't meet Greg in person, but they can get to know him because you did have the honor of having him on Actors Talk for 2 episodes, I believe.
Yeah, I did 2 episodes with him later in his life, and he still, when you listen to it now, as someone who knew him for a long time, some of the energy had gone from his voice, but he still had that great voice on him, and of course his mental faculties were still completely in order and all that. So it was great to get to talk to him. And I'm so happy that I did those 2 episodes. One was more about his career and just his start in the business and everything. And then one had to do with what for a long time was the bane of his existence, and then he came to accept it later in his life with good humor. That was being the lead in one of the worst films of all time, Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space.
And I love that episode.
For a long time, Greg just, oh boy, he would just get so frustrated because, he had worked with Eastwood and all these big directors and big films and big stars and big projects, and nobody ever wanted to talk to him about that. All they wanted to talk about was Plan 9 from Outer Space. But you know what? Later in his life, he came to really embrace it with good cheer and said, told me one time, Tommy, that of all the work I've done, the thing that's keeping my name alive longer than anything else is Plan 9 from Outer Space. So I owe Ed Wood an apology, for all the bad things I've said about that film through the years. So.
Well, Tommy, as we kind of wind down here, what advice would you give to that actor that's reaching out to you saying, Tommy, I've seen you in Bernie. I've seen you in the Alamo. I know you're there. You're doing it. What do I got to do to break through? What do I do to take that next step? What would be your advice for them?
Well, I tell you, the business has changed a lot. And I would tell actors today, you are in the most incredibly opportunistic period that there's ever been in the business. So take heart and understand what an opportunity you have that maybe we didn't have 40 years ago when I started. And that's partly driven by technology and the internet, quite frankly. So the old model for getting work was you somehow scraped around, got enough experience, got an agent interested in you, you signed up with that agent, and then you sat and waited for the phone to ring, for the agent to call you, to tell you you had an audition, to go in and try and get a job. And that pretty much was the model. And that was the model that I had for, a vast majority of my career. And that's not to say that was the only model that was workable, but that's the only model I knew about and that most actors knew about. That's all different now. So what I would tell an actor now is don't sit and wait for the phone to ring. Realize that if you do have an agent only gets 10% of your income, hopefully, and that's because they're only supposed to do 10% of the work. We as actors are supposed to do the majority of the work, and nowadays we can. I've got an iPhone 6S Plus or whatever the model is that I can pick up right now, and if I want to shoot a scene that I write or a scene from a play or practice a scene from another film or something, I can do that and have a high definition copy of that easily. Or I can take and get with a friend who's a writer who wants to write scenes or wants to write a short film, and we can pair up with somebody else who's good at sound, and we have a little crew together, and we could take that iPhone or whatever model or a Galaxy or whatever your high definition phone is, or your DSLR, if you want to get even better, and go shoot that project. Now we're doing something creative. We are involved in controlling our own career. Well, are we going to make any money from that? Probably not directly. But what we are doing is increasing our craft. We're giving people something to look at. If we do something really good, we're putting ourselves out there to be noticed in a way that's going to want people to come to us and say, hey, I'd like for you to come be in my project, so that it's not on the other way. It's not us going saying, hey, can I please work for you? No. We have people coming to us saying, I saw your film on YouTube. I saw your film on Facebook. I saw that little clip you posted there on Twitter, and I really like your look. I liked what you were doing there. I like your writing. I have a project. I need somebody to rewrite it. There's all sorts of ways now that we can use current technology, social media, to create work, create content, to improve our own skills, and at the same time make us a more attractive person to the people who will want to work with us. So that would be my advice. Don't sit and wait. Get up off your butt and go create something. There's no excuse not to.
Love it. That is awesome. Well, Tommy, this has just been a thrill for me. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, I'm at actorstalkpodcast.com is the website. They can also get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm becoming much more active and trying to get a handle on Twitter, so you can reach me at Actors Talk. Or if you want to email questions or comments, that's at Tommy at actorstalkpodcast.com.
We'll have links to all that in the show notes.
Thanks, Doc.